India time. Thank you very much. We're here to discuss democracy and the degree to which it may or may not represent the will of the people. And I'd like, obviously in India we've just come out of a long and fairly dramatic and I think eventually very transformative election. And Ambassador Varma, you were involved in that process as well. I mean, you've recently retired from the diplomatic service and you've resigned from the diplomatic service and you have chosen a peaceful post-retirement activity, something which will not take up much of your time, energy, or mental space. How was this election for you?
Well, let me first say that it's not that there's not enough work in the bureaucracy, but politics is definitely more demanding. But to answer your question, yes, we've had a very important election, and for the first time we have got for a non-Congress party, it's come to an absolute majority of its own. For those who were opposing the party, there is one, and those who were with the party, there is one. One thing is clear, we respect the mandate of the people. Indian democracy has been now functioning for 6 decades and more. And it's very important in this process that both those who have won and those who have lost remember that in the framework of democracy, the ruling party and the opposition both have a role. I say this because we have the first past the post system, unlike in Bhutan, which has a different kind of system. Now it throws up many anomalies. For instance, I can share with you that the Bharatiya Janata Party got 283 seats out of a parliament of 543 or so, with a vote base of about 31% of the electorate. The Congress party got 44 seats. But the percentage difference between what the BJP got and the Congress party got is only 12%. The Congress party got 19% of the vote and managed 44 seats. The BJP got 31% of the vote and got 283 seats. In Uttar Pradesh, Mayawati got 20% of the electorate and got 0 seats. So the difference of the vote percentage was 12%, but the difference in the seats was that the BJP got 600% more seats than the Congress party. Equally, what this indicates is that while 31% is one of the lowest ever electoral support for a party to win as many seats as 283. Usually it's higher. When Rajiv Gandhi won his historic mandate in 1984 with 403 seats, I think he had somewhere in the vicinity of 40% of the electoral support. Now here is a party which has won 31%, which means essentially that over 60% of India or India's electorate did not vote for him. Between those who voted and those who didn't, the vote percentage indicates. But we have a first past the post system. It's a tried and tested system. There are many voices of reform as well, including that of proportional representation. But then it's the last thing to tell a party which has just won.
Ambassador, Bhutan has now, as Ambassador Varma said, has a slightly different system. And could you tell us, in your long career representing Bhutan, if you were ever asked by another country whether Bhutan would ever transition to democracy in the time, in your lifetime or during your career? Was this a question that was asked, and how, if so, did you answer?
Thank you. And I would like to thank the organizers for putting me with these three distinguished panelists, Mihir, Lily, and Pavan. And after listening to Pavan, I get the impression, probably the will of the people, probably somewhat insuspect. No. Anyway, we cannot talk about democracy and will of the people without talking about the greatest democratic practices and biggest democratic election of India. And I'd like to congratulate the Election Commission of India and the people of India for successfully concluding this great show of democracy. Was it E.M. Foster? He said, democracy admits variety. Democracy permits criticism. And he said, democracy also encourages discussion. You asked whether we are transitioning from monarchy to democracy. I think, having seen 2 general elections here in Bhutan, I would say, yes, we have seen varieties, as E.M. Foster said. Well, in this small country, we have as many as 5 political parties and so many parliamentarians and candidates. And criticism, have we heard enough during the 2 general election? So much of criticism against each other. And indeed, those criticisms was necessarily encouraged great discussions and debates. But fortunately, probably it is not as vigorous as it has been displayed in India and in the Indian political system. But having said this, as you know, democracy, somebody said that, requires time. And it requires patience. Because democracy has to be based on a country's history and the country's culture. I should say that within these 6 years of democracy, transitioning from 100 years of monarchy to democracy, we have done pretty well here in Bhutan. Don't you think?
I hope your throat is better, a little better than it was yesterday. So, as the ambassador said, it's been a 6-year transition. And do you think that maybe things have been happening faster than some here are comfortable with?
First of all, I would just like to His Majesty, I thought King of Bhutan. I have a really bad throat. His Majesty, the 4th King of Bhutan, took over the country when he was only 16 years of age, and he devoted his entire life to the well-being and prosperity of this country for more than 3 decades. So when His Majesty introduced democracy, much to the reluctance of the Bhutanese citizens in 2008, a lot of us were not ready for change, because we believed that the earlier system of governance worked very well for our country. 4 decades ago, we talked about a country that was completely underdeveloped, totally cut off from the rest of the world. And today, we can boast of the highest GDP in South Asia. We enjoy a lot of privileges and opportunities as citizens, with access to free education, health, equal opportunities. And as citizens over the last 3 decades, we've all sat back as beneficiaries while His Majesty has worked really hard, involved in a lot of personal sacrifices for this country. So when democracy was introduced, a lot of us were reluctant because we have enjoyed a lot of progress and prosperity over the last 3 decades of His Majesty's reign, under His Majesty's reign. And we felt there was no need for change. And also, I think most of us were not ready to take on this responsibility in the interest of our society, for our country, because we had His Majesty doing that for us. So we were not ready for change. And so I think change was forced upon us. And over the last 6 years, we have seen 2 rounds of election. And what most of us have observed is, under the earlier system of governance, there has been a strong sense of solidarity and unity under one king. But today we find ourselves, unfortunately, divided amongst different party groups, this fragmentation in the society. And we believe that this change, associated with democracy, there has been some challenges. And while I believe that while democracy has been gifted to us in the best interests of our nation, I think we have not prepared ourselves well enough for this political transition. When we made this change from 2006 to 2008, I think while we had the democratic institutions in place, and democracy actually was not a new experience for us. We had a lot of devolution and decentralization of power right through the 80s and 90s, and the decision-making process has been very democratic in nature. But campaign, elections, making informed choices were new experiences for us. And perhaps we thought this is somewhere you might need to revisit so that we can make democracy work in our country and fulfill His Majesty's noble objective for the country.
Ambassador Varma, so there was a reference to how sometimes in democracy, the will of the people can lead to fragmentation. And is it the case that there are some elections in India, for example, in which the will of the people has been for a fragmentation, and some in which there has been a will for unity? And if so, with the one that we've gone through, which one would you say it is?
No, I would not like to use the word fragmentation. With due respect to Lily, I think it's too strong a word. What democracy allows is the expression of differences. Differences often provide the template on which a larger unity of a nation can be built, because if you do not allow differences to be expressed, the entire fabric becomes brittle and can perhaps fragment that much easier. I believe democracy allows the expression of differences, and these differences are expressed with occasional acrimony during elections. But I don't believe that it should lead to the diminishing of respect. It's important, and I can say to you that in the political arena, there are many people from different political parties we disagree with vehemently. And in my case, very often that happens for the nation to watch on public television. But after that, we can have a cup of coffee together, and we do so very often. Which essentially means, and if you go to the Central Hall of Parliament in Delhi, you will see people who have literally on occasion stopped Parliament from functioning because of political differences, are sitting together happily over lunch, enjoying a meal and cracking a joke together, and they are in personal life friends. So it is that kind of respect which becomes, I mean, in our country, it's not only about parliamentary elections. in the presidential election, which is a representative election carried out through Parliament and the states. The moment, and there are only usually 2 candidates or 3 candidates, the moment the election is announced, the candidate who has lost is the first visitor to meet the candidate who has won, to congratulate him. And this is what most leaders did in the elections right now. So really I think fragmentation is not right. Societies must allow for differences and allow those differences to be resolved through the expression of the popular will without irremediable hostility. I think that is the strength of democracy.
Ambassador, the question then arises about maybe the way that, for example, the Indian party political system, which can, as Ambassador Varma says, leads to a certain degree of acrimony. Maybe that wasn't the best first step. Were there other alternatives, do you think, that were ever considered as steps towards democracy, maybe a party-less democracy first, when Bhutan was, when this transition was being considered?
I think I agree with Pavan. I think democracy is a concept and governance system which really cuts across social barriers. And I believe in India, even cuts across political barriers. Yeah, political barriers. Even after the election. Maybe in Bhutan, I think we are only 6 years old, and probably it takes time to heal and to realize that it is the will of the people that we have to respect. Democracy is such that we may like A, B candidate, C candidate, or A party or B party. But democracy has a way of cutting across and making the will of people respected. And that, I think, is the ultimate essence of democracy. Except probably in the case of George Bush and Al Gore. So that they said Al Gore has the nationwide support, but George Bush has won Florida, and he's become the president. But what I find about the most interesting thing about democracy is the government in the democracy is like our philosophy of Vajrayana. The Vajrayana philosophy which says that what was, is not, will not be. I thought that can be applied to the democratic system of the governance. Well, basically, whatever they do, whosoever is there, they have to remember that the will of the people is respected. And they cannot forget who elected them and why they have been elected to be there. And sometimes, I think I have heard, I was participating in a round table on a community of democracy. Somebody said, you know, the politicians, what they are motivated and how they are motivated. The motivations of the politicians are guided or based or shaped by power and wealth. So I hope this kind of politics will not creep into the Bhutanese society and the Bhutanese political system. And so far, we've been able to avoid this. And we hope it will continue to be so. Because in the ultimate analysis, sometimes we forget, no? In the ultimate analysis, they say there is no democracy without election. Yeah, election is so important. But when we think about it, election is the source of all problems. Election is the source of all problems. And why? Because during the election, all the political parties and the candidates, they have to raise so much funds to campaign. And where do they get the money from? They have to find money from different places, different sources. Then the people in general think, oh, election is all money. They blame the election. But I hope probably this is mainly the election. But our politicians, at the ultimate analysis, I hope that they will remember that what they deliver, why they have been elected, why they are there to govern. They govern because of the consent of the governed. And they have to deliver development, they have to deliver security, and above all, they have to deliver dignity to the people who elected them. And in Bhutanese terms, I believe this is the way to realizing our goal of gross national happiness.
You had something to say on the subject of...
No, I just want to say, Ambassador, that I don't wish it upon you, but I don't believe the age of innocence in politics lasts very long. And indeed Bhutan also in competitive politics. But I still feel, without the slightest hesitation, really, that in spite of the many faults that the system generates, the overall good is large. And therefore you cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater. In our country, elections in India are the largest organized human exercise in the world. When people hear of the number of the electorate, there is usually a stunned silence. Obviously, since democracy and power and access to the perquisites of the state and discretionary powers that then distributed are linked, there is a great incentive to win. And it is for this reason, I think, that progressively we've strengthened the Election Commission of India. Because our subject today is the will of the people. If there is a fault in the system, then I'm afraid the system is not reflecting the will of the people. And that's why I have argued consistently, Mihir, that the Election Commission's powers need to be further strengthened. And I have no hesitation in admitting here that the Election Commission, in all humility, has submitted several recommendations to Parliament to further strengthen its powers. And for reasons which are not a mystery at all, Parliament has not acted upon it. So we need to strengthen the Election Commission. It's a gigantic exercise. By and large, I can say, I know there are problems. I mean, I went to meet the Chief Election Commissioner twice during this election because there were problems from our point of view in the conduct of elections in Bihar. The whole administration has been placed under the Election Commission. By the way, the Chief Election Commissioner in our country is a constitutional authority protected thereby, but the other two election commissioners are not. The power to deregister parties, the power to take action which is far stronger than the current level of admonition which is often ignored. A previous Chief Election Commissioner, after admonishing two competitors who were also ex-ministers or ministers at that time, found that his hands were really tied in doing anything further because they refused to change.
Don't you think there should be something in between deregistering a party?
I'm saying ultimate powers. Certainly what I'm trying to tell you is that if anything, the election commission's power should be increased, strengthened, because the ingenuity of the candidate in a highly competitive political environment is almost limitless. And all the ills that were mentioned by Ambassador, especially with regard to money power, muscle power, all of these are evident and we need to control them.
But do you think that we were ever innocent in our first, in either 52 or something like that, in our first election?
No, the degree of temptation was lesser. The degree of temptation was lesser. And I must say, even if there was a certain high-minded idealism about the elections, it was very quickly, and that's part of the Indian psyche, tempered by the pragmatism of the need to win an election. I say this not as a cynic. I say this that there is the human proclivity, but there is equally the need for the strength of the system to control it. And I would say by and large we've devised it, but we need to further strengthen it.
Really, on the subject of the will of the people again, in Bhutan is very, in a very considered manner, has chosen to go with a system that ensures there will always be a two-party face-off. Now you run a smaller party, not one of the two main parties in the Bhutanese political system. Do you feel that this discriminates in a way against, for example, your party or other voices that have special interests?
Before I respond to this question, allow me to just respond to it.
Louder.
You are a politician on the field, so
The voice has gone.
Sorry. Okay, before I respond to that question, I would just like to make a comment on what the Ambassador mentioned about fragmentation. When democracy was introduced, His Majesty, the fourth king, he felt that no Bhutanese in this country should be indispensable. For that matter, even the king of Bhutan. And the power must be in the hands of the people so that the governance is transparent, more accountable, and more responsive in keeping with the changing times with the needs of the people. So democracy obviously has its good and bad, but democracy was introduced with His Majesty's noble intention for this country. And there are wonderful elements to be drawn from democracy. Now, when I talk about fragmentation, I'm not saying that with democracy, the society gets fragmented. But Bhutan largely has a young population. We have a largely rural society. And by and large, people have limited understanding about the essence of democracy. And I believe while we have put in a lot of effort on teaching people how to vote, I believe we have not done enough to educate people on the essence of democracy so that we can draw the best essence of democracy. We've not done well enough. And in 2008, civic education responsibility was carried out by political parties. And anywhere else in the world, it has to be done by a neutral organization. And unfortunately, that's one area where we have not paid a lot of attention. And as a result, if the society is getting divided around party line, it's really because of our own limited understanding of democracy. And I think this is where the relevant institutions and different political groups have a role to play in bridging this gap, bringing people together, not engaging in mudslinging, and undoing the damage that has been done over the last 2 elections. Now, as far as the representation is concerned, we have a two-party system, and those of us, who have not made it in the elections, who have got eliminated in the primary round, so far we have not had adequate platform for us to represent the voices of people that are believers, or in our ideology or our party. But the five political parties, since the elections, we have been working very closely together. And we have a common understanding on how all of us together can work towards promoting vibrant democracy in the country.
Right, we have maybe 8 minutes now. So I think it's time for a few questions from the floor. Does anybody have, are there any questions? Yes, sir. Gentlemen, can someone get to...
I want to ask a question about this word that is used in democracies. There's the party in power, and then there's the opposition. I want to put to you, the word opposition is probably a wrong word, imported from England or America or wherever it is, because we are only elected. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Because I have such a loud voice, good for elections. Because only 30% or 25% or 28% or some extraordinary cases where 40% of the people vote for you, 60% haven't voted for you, it doesn't mean that they're opposed to you. It means they're not exactly agreeing to your agenda, or they don't fall within your caste group or religious group, etc. So I want to ask this August group, what can we do about exorcising the word opposition from our language and using some other word which might be more appropriate? I mean, for instance, if the Congress Party opposes everything that the BJP is trying to do because they are opposition, and they have heard somewhere that Winston Churchill said that the job of the opposition is to oppose, then we have a serious problem in it.
The one way to exorcise it, Siddharth, is to add another word to it, which is normally the interpretation in parliamentary practice: constructive opposition, partnership. You are not opposed for the sake of opposing, but you are there to act as a watchdog. And you are there to oppose and to support where required. I don't think you can take away the need for an opposition in a democracy, but you need to have a far more informed opposition. And let me tell you quickly as a comment what happens in India. When the government, it's not the case of this government, but when governments have very slender majorities, and they are a coalition of several parties, and there is the possibility that on any issue the government can actually fall. The opposition changes from being a constructive opposition to a predatory opposition. In other words, it opposes not because it believes that it should oppose, but because of that opportunity that it may give to either fatally embarrass the government or topple it. And we have been seeing that happen where the fault lies both with the treasury benches and the opposition. It should not happen. I think an opposition should be constructive.
Did you feel that in the Bhutanese system there is sufficient cooperation now between the two parties, between the party in power and what would be called the opposition party? Do you think that there's a constructive relationship between them, or is it destructive?
Well, from our observation, I think where there is a need to oppose, there has been, the government has been opposing, the opposition party has been opposing on certain issues. But I think where there is a common, agreement, I think there has been cooperation as well.
I think maybe we have a couple of minutes, so one more quick question for anybody. Yeah, second row.
Thank you so much. It was very interesting to have a newer perspective on how do you look at democracy. And if I've understood, this is good, and if I've understood the very bedrock of democracy is about for the people and of the people and by the people, I haven't really heard from the panelists in the emerging times the shift of the power to active citizens and collectives. And if you've seen it in the recent times in many countries, the collectives are gaining more and more power and holding the institutions accountable for not delivering, for what they have the mandate to. Maybe some insights.
Certainly, Mr. Sriram's panel tomorrow on civil society, I think, is going to discuss a lot of those things. I think maybe for a younger democracy, the division between civil society and party politics is not as sharp as it is in India.
Not sharp in India. I don't think it's sharp in India. One of the good things that has happened has been the growth, independent of the competitive political system, of watchdog groups, of non-governmental and non-political organizations, which provide a lot of data, which are constantly questioning the raison d'etre of certain policies. And I believe there should be a far more dynamic linkage between political parties and such watchdog groups. I don't think they are in contradiction at all.
Thank you. I think we're pretty much out of time. I've definitely learned a lot in this discussion, and I hope everybody else did. Thank all three of you for your insights, and best of luck for the next election, and Ambassador Varma.